Very few games in human history have managed to shock and awe gamers, excite them, and yet cause them so much pain and anguish like Naughty Dog's critically acclaimed action-adventure game, The Last of Us. It's a spellbinding story that put the gaming world in a chokehold for the last decade. It's been lauded by critics worldwide and has won so many gaming awards that Naughty Dog is probably running out of room to put them all. The franchise has been so successful that it has a comic book adaptation and an HBO TV series, Season 1 of which walked away with 8 Emmy Awards and loads of accolades. It's a PlayStation exclusive that has single-handedly put the Xbox gaming community on suicide watch.
Come on now, dawg. Come on, man.
Yet amidst all this earth-shattering success, the franchise has been marred by controversy, debates, and a couple of canceled projects. This begs the question, what is it about The Last of Us that has made it so incredible and yet so controversial? Why do many consider it the best video game of all time? If you're one of those asking this burning question or just simply curious, then you've come to the right place, because today I'm going to be covering the entire history of the Last of Us franchise. Without further ado, let's get into it. Development of The Last of Us began in 2009 after the release of Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. For the first time in Naughty Dog's illustrious history, the studio was split into 2 teams. The first worked on Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception, while the other worked on The Last of Us, which was scheduled for release in 2013. The Last of Us team was led by Neil Druckmann and Bruce Staley, who both served as game director and creative director respectively. Many expected that the game as jarring and gory as The Last of Us had to be influenced by popular zombie shows like The Walking Dead or Valve's Left 4 Dead. Still shockingly, Neil Druckmann admitted in a later interview that his significant influence on the game was the family-friendly PlayStation 2 game, Eco, if you would believe it. Other mediums that influenced the gorier aspects of the game would include George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, Sin City,
is that the best you can do, creep?
Resident Evil 4, and so on. Actors Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson provided voice and motion capture performances for Joel and Ellie, respectively, while Argentinian composer Gustavo Santaolalla was responsible for the heart-rending original score which haunts our dreams to this day. The game was announced in December 2011 during the Spike Game Awards and then released in June 2013 after a brief delay. In The Last of Us, you play as Joel, a middle-aged man who loses his 12-year-old daughter, Sarah, during a virus outbreak that turned infected people into zombies. Sarah died in Joel's arms after being shot while the two were attempting to flee. 20 years after that incident, Joel is now a smuggler in a quarantine zone in Boston, Massachusetts. He and his partner, Tess, are tasked with smuggling a 14-year-old girl named Ellie to a resistance group known as the Fireflies.
I ain't telling you shit.
That's all right. I believe him.
No, wait!
Now, tragically, Tess is bitten and dies along the way, leaving Joel to care for Ellie and complete the task they set out to do. At first, Joel was reluctant, but after several months of traveling with Ellie, she became like a daughter to him.
You're right. You're not my daughter.
This made it even more unbearable for Joel when they finally reach the Fireflies, and Marlene informs Joel that Ellie would have to die. Now, as it turns out, Ellie is the only person immune to the virus, and the Fireflies hope to create a vaccine by cutting out and examining the infected portion of her brain. This procedure could potentially save all of mankind, but would certainly kill Ellie. Unwilling to let Ellie die, Joel kills the members of the Fireflies, including the lead surgeon who is about to perform the surgery, and escapes with Ellie. The surgeon will be super important later, so take note of him. Anyway, when Ellie finally regains consciousness, Joel lies to her. that the Fireflies have found other immune people but were unable to create a cure. The story of The Last of Us is definitely the most incredible facet of the game, and is part of what made it stand out from other zombie-related titles that had permeated the gaming world at the time. Tear-jerking moments like the scene when Sarah died in Joel's arms, or the time when Tess revealed she was infected, or even the giraffe scene would live long in the memories of gamers all over the world. The game was so well received that media outlets worldwide tripped over themselves to give it a perfect review. IGN called it a masterpiece. As I mentioned earlier, The Last of Us got buried under an avalanche of awards, including the 41st Annie Awards, the 10th British Academy Video Game Award, 17th Annual DICE Awards, 14th Annual Game Developers Choice Awards, the whole enchilada. Reports from media outlets like Destructoid, The Escapist, Games Radar, Game Trailers, Game Revolution, Giant Bomb, Good Game, Hardcore Gamer, IGN, IGN Australia, International Business Times, Kotaku, and many others, to include your very own Gamers Enquirer. But you get the point. Everyone and their granny was lining up to praise this game, and they were right too. It had the second highest Metascore of any game in 2013, which isn't bad, especially considering that the highest ranking game was GTA 5.
Oh, shit. Here we go again.
Almost immediately after the first game hit the stores, the idea of a single-player DLC was greenlit. The DLC was titled Left Behind, and its story was set 3 weeks before the events of The Last of Us. Left Behind's story is split into two halves. One half follows Ellie as she spends time with her best friend Riley in an abandoned mall in Boston. The second takes place between the fall and winter chapters of the main story and focuses on Ellie's attempts to scour an abandoned mall in Colorado for medical supplies to save Joel's life. The DLC was released in February 2014 and July 2014 respectively for the PS3 and PS4. Fans and media outlets welcomed it with open arms. It received several awards and nominations, including a nomination at the Game of the Year Awards. And for a DLC, that's really saying something. As you would have probably guessed by now, The Last of Us' success was so great that it quickly turned into Sony's cash cow. And boy, did they squeeze out every drop of milk they possibly could. The remaster of the game came in July 2014, barely a year after the original game was released. And it was made for the PlayStation 4 and spotted a few upgrades, including boosts in graphics, frame rate, and performance, just like the original game. The remaster was also showered with praise. Journalists gushed over the improved graphic fidelity and controls. And finally, a remake of The Last of Us was made in 2022 for the PS5 titled Last of Us Part 1. It was released in September 2022 with a less polished PC port released in March 2023. While spotting no story or narrative changes, the remake boasted a graphical and performance leap over its predecessor, which by the way, we also feature on this channel. Despite a lot of gamers being displeased with the price of the game, I played it, and I absolutely loved every bit of it, down to the tiniest polygon. You can check out my review of The Last of Us 1 for a more in-depth game analysis. I promise it will totally be worth your while. Development of The Last of Us 2 began immediately after the release of The Last of Us Remastered. Neil Druckmann reprised his role as the game's creative director and stated that the story for The Last of Us 2 was influenced by his experiences growing up in Israel. While the first game dealt with themes of love and hope, the second game's story was more centered on the cycle of vengeance and the lengths we would go to avenge the ones we love. This is part of the reason why the second game seemed bloodier and more dour than the first. Now, initially, The Last of Us 2 was planned as an open world game, which is part of the reason why sections of the game, like Seattle, look so incredibly bad. However, that idea was eventually scrapped for a more linear layout, which favored the narrative style of the game. Actors Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson reprised their roles for Joel and Ellie. They also voiced and provided motion capture for both characters. Laura Bailey played the role of Abby, a new playable character in the series whose appearance and actions triggered some of the controversy surrounding the game. More on that later. Now, the game's composer Gustavo also returned to compose the original score of this game. His hauntingly beautiful acoustics was one of the many facets of the game praised by reviewers after its release. On the other hand, Matt Quayle handled the heart-pounding combat music. The Last of Us 2 is Naughty Dog's biggest project to date. In the end, it took approximately 2,169 developers across 14 studios and a cost of around $220 million to make the game. Considering The Last of Us 2 has sold over 10 million copies in the last 2 years, I would say it's more than made up for its budget. The story of The Last of Us 2 is set 5 years after the first game's events. If you recall, at the end of the previous game, Joel had taken down the Fireflies and killed a group of surgeons to save Ellie's life. He also lied to her face about it. Joel's actions, while done out of his love for Ellie, had also extinguished what was probably humanity's last hope of developing a cure for the zombie pandemic. Joel and Ellie move to a settlement in Jackson where they make a home for themselves alongside Joel's brother Tommy and his wife. While on patrol, Joel and Tommy rescue a stranger named Abby from an infected horde. They return to an outpost used as a temporary hideout by Abby's group, who are former Fireflies and are now part of the Washington Liberation Front, or in other words, WLF, a militia group based in Seattle, Washington. As fate would have it, Abby was the daughter of the lead Firefly surgeon whom Joel murdered while rescuing Ellie. Abby and the rest of the WLF then exact their revenge by beating Joel to death while Tommy and Ellie watched. Abby spares Ellie and Tommy, who swear revenge. Ellie and her girlfriend Dina set out for Seattle to kill Abby and the other WLF members responsible for Joel's murder. For more on the plot and other excellent parts of The Last of Us 2, check out the review I did on it a year ago. The review breaks down pretty much everything you need to know going into the game, including the parts that I felt were pretty awesome and other facets that could have probably been handled better. The story of The Last of Us 2 is a convoluted, emotionally charged tale of revenge. It is dripping with grief, empathy, and more brutality than a Mortal Kombat trailer.
Finish him!
There were times while playing the game when I genuinely put down the controller, went outside, and stared at the clouds for a bit. It's that emotionally taxing. There are so many grisly scenes in the game to pick from, like the WLF's attack on the Seraphite village, the scene where Ellie inadvertently kills Owen's pregnant wife, and of course, Ellie and Abby's final fight on the beach. However, the most haunting, petrifying moment was for me watching Joel get beaten to death. That scene was emotionally jarring for me, and apparently for many other gamers out there. Some gamers were pleased that a game could make them feel such wide range of emotions, while other gamers were downright pissed. Regarding its reception, the game was warmly received on the critics' side, with IGN giving it another perfect score of 10 out of 10. It also had a Metascore of 93, which, though lower than that of its predecessor, was still pretty damn impressive. However, on the player side, things weren't so rosy. Some gamers complained that the game was layered with too much politics and LGBTQ overtones. This view wasn't only because of Ellie's relationship with Dina, but also because of the buff, manly appearance of Abby, whom some fans mistook for being a transgender character. Some took umbrage with the decision to kill off Joel, a character whom they have bonded with significantly. Others were even more frustrated by the fact that you were forced to spare Abby at the end of the game, regardless of whether you wanted to or not. These and a host of other niggling complaints led to the game being review bombed on certain outlets, leaving it with user score of 3.4 on Metacritic. Apparently, hell hath no fury like a gamer scorned. The review bombing, however, did not stop the game from carting away with a whopping 41 Game of the Year awards from a multitude of gaming outlets, a record which was later broken in 2022 by, you guessed it, Elden Ring. Sadly, The Last of Us 2 never received a full-fledged story DLC like The Last of Us had with Left Behind.
Come on now, dawg. Come on, man.
However, a remastered version of The Last of Us 2 came out January 19th exclusively for PS5, which we feature a movie on it on this channel. Strangely, Naughty Dog has been eerily quiet about the possibility of a PC port for the remastered version.
Fix the game!
Judging from their success from The Last of Us 1 PC port, one would cogently surmise that a Windows port of The Last of Us 2 is on its way. But the precise date when that port will be released is still anybody's guess.
Nice.
Finally, a multiplayer version of The Last of Us titled Last of Us Online was under development but was, however, scrapped in 2023. Naughty Dog cited that the reason for canceling the game was owed to their desire to preserve the original narrative-driven legacy of the game. In my opinion, I think they made the right call. The Last of Us sold over 1.3 million units within 7 days of its release. 3 weeks later, the game sold over 3.4 million units. By 2018, The Last of Us have sold over 18 million copies, making it one of the best and fastest selling PS3 and PS4 titles of all time. Last of Us 2 hasn't been quite as commercially successful as the original game, but it's still pulling its own weight with more than 10 million copies sold thus far. However, with the remaster version just coming out a week or two ago, that figure has no way to go but up. The Last of Us Part 1 was the 5th best-selling game of September 2022 and the 4th best-selling PlayStation game. Following the debut of The Last of Us on HBO series in January 2023, the game became the 8th most downloaded title in North America and the 10th in Europe. The PC port was similarly successful, selling close to 368,000 units within 4 weeks of its release and generating close to $16 million worth of revenue. And as of December 2022, the franchise sold over 37 million copies. It has made billions in revenue, and the IP is valued at around $35 billion. Now, that's a lot of money. In conclusion, The Last of Us has left a huge mark on the video game world. Its captivating, nail-biting stories, breathtaking visuals, and innovative gameplay has set a bar that many games in the industry still struggle to pass, even till today. The fact that it has spawned a successful TV series, comic book adaptation, and loads of knockoffs is a testament to just how strong and successful the brand is. While certain facets of the franchise are shrouded in controversy, especially as The Last of Us 2 is concerned, the legacy of The Last of Us still remains as strong as ever, and it rightfully deserves its place as one of the best video game franchises of all time. And there you have it. That was the history of Last of Us. Which Last of Us game is your favorite so far? Let me know in the comments. Also, remember to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell if you haven't already to get regular updates on new videos. Had a blast doing this video, you guys, and I hope to see you all in the next one.